Welcome to the Dairy Good Dawgs, a place where we talk everything from the barn to the arch and where conversations are all things dairy, the people, the science, and the stories behind the cows. Hi, everyone. I'm Sophie Dupont, and I'll be co-hosting today's episode with Dr. Jillian Bohlen. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by Ken McCarty. Ken is a co-owner and manager of McCarty Family Farms, a fourth-generation dairy farming operation with locations in Kansas and Ohio. Hi, Ken. So glad to have you with us.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So as we kick off things here, for those who are new or don't know a lot about you or your family, I was just wondering if you could share a little bit about your background and kind of the story of McCarty Family Farms.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, we're a fourth generation family dairy farm, originally from northeastern Pennsylvania. So my great grandfather actually started our family's dairy in northeastern Pennsylvania. Very idyllic red barn on the side hill, 8 cows out on pasture. Very typical of the time in the locale. My grandfather took that farm over in the 40s and went wild and expanded it to about 40 cows in the same location. He was progressive for his time, and as it pertains to the conversation we're going to have today, he was the first farmer in the county to put in a pipeline. First farmer in the county to put in a barn cleaner system. I mean, he was pretty progressive with the technology of the day for his time. And my dad wanted to come back to the farm. And when he was in college, he was a Penn State grad. When he was in college, there was some family health issues and wasn't really sure that there was going to be a farm for him to return to. So he actually got a degree in education. And when he got out of college, the farm had survived. He milked cows with my grandfather in the mornings and in the evenings, taught school throughout the day, and uh, always wanted a farm of his own. Ended up moving about a mile up the road from where my grandfather's dairy was at, and bought the farm that my brothers and I were born and raised on. And he and my mom, grew that farm over the years. I grew up milking 150 cows in a highline pipeline tie stall barn. And in the early 90s, our parents knew that, with four boys, milking 150 cows in northeastern Pennsylvania was going to be tough to support um, my brothers and I, as well as my parents, if we chose to come back. And
Mm.
so they began to look for ways that we could change what we did in northeastern PA. We tried, growing there with taking on some satellite farms. And eventually my parents sat us down and said, hey, we either need to totally change what we're doing or we need to move. And we kind of collectively decided that we were willing and open to moving. And we looked all over the U.S., Western New York State, Lancaster and Pennsylvania, Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska. I think we've been through literally every single county in the state of Kansas, and eventually settled in Northwest Kansas. And we moved in 1999. Started the dairy in Rexford, Kansas, in April of 2000. And to tell you how naive we were to dairying at scale and dairying in a modern for 2000 facility. When the builders left, we didn't know how to turn the parlor on. So we had a very, very steep learning curve. And since that time, we've steadily grown. Today in Kansas, we milk cows on three separate locations, one in Bird City, Kansas, milking about, a little over 3,000 cows. The home farm in Rexford, Kansas, where we milk about 10,000 cows, have a centralized dry cow and calving facility, and an on-farm milk processing plant where we process all the milk we produce in western Kansas, and then a sister farm in Scott City, Kansas, where we milk about 2,700 cows. And then additionally, we have a partnership dairy in west central Ohio called MVP Dairy, in partnership with a row crop farming family, the Van Tilburgs, there, and we milk about 3,500 to 4,000 cows at that farm.
Ah, Wow. I cannot believe, the resiliency throughout generations, to keep the farm going and also to modernize, find what works for you, even if it means moving states. I love it. So, with this history and generational commitment to farming and, to keeping everything going no matter what and coming back to the farm, working, contributing. I'm wondering, are there core values or something that your family holds dear that have kind of guided you all as you've grown and modernized, or has it really been modernizing with the times and with technology?
Yeah. So there's a lot of answers to that question, and from a, my brothers and I were, we were taught at a very young age by our parents that when people are taking the easy way and kind of going with the flow of the stream, you might be better suited to at least evaluate going against the currents. And
Mm.
in particular, as it comes to, or as it pertains to, food production, right? I mean, if you look at what's happening in the United States in terms of the percent of the population that's actually involved in production agriculture, the number continues to shrink. And in certain industries, it shrinks at an alarming pace. And, it's always been kind of encouraged to us that that presents an opportunity, and people always have to eat. And, the services that we provide to the economy, to the community, to, the consumer in general, to the world, are always going to be there. It might not be easy, but they're always going to be in demand. But when it comes to philosophies and kind of attitudes that drive us forward, we have signs up around our farms that say, dirt, and you work in ag, so you understand. Sometimes in ag you get dirty, but what dirt stands for us is, dedication and integrity and responsibility and teamwork, and
Mm.
or I should say respect and teamwork. And those are things that we find are kind of the core values that we try to bring to work every day, bring to our communities every day, bring to our cows every day. Um, and as it pertains to kind of how that looks like from an adoption of technology, there's a lot of other factors that go into the our attitudes towards adopting technology. Some of that is, we're in agriculture, right? So some of it is simply, can we afford it? You know,
Right.
and hey, we try to balance the things like labor efficiency. Technology is great, but for those of us that live in rural America, that's it might be what's best for our business, but it might not be what's best for the community. So, you know, there's a bit of a balancing act with that sort of stuff, but we have multiple different factors that we feed into any sort of decision when it comes to the adoption of technology.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I really appreciate, the obviously successful act of creating harmony and teamwork, on such a large scale, to not only help the working environment and the animals, but also to help a business succeed. I think, your parents were really correct in instilling those values. And it sounds like you all have done a great job of keeping that going, and facing, any challenges that come your way on that front. When we think about, challenges or opportunities that you've taken with technology, or kind of any other aspect of growing the farm or modernizing, I'm wondering, we have certain regional challenges that affect us here in the Southeast. And as I'm, a little unfamiliar with your neck of the woods, are there any more regional challenges that you all, or opportunities that you all have faced or found, that has helped you develop or kind of hindered, and then you've, hopped over that?
Yeah. So, we obviously did not grow up in Northwest Kansas, so we had a heck of a lot to learn when we moved here.
Yeah.
I grew up literally in the bottom of a Appalachian valley, and travel stream in front of our house, trees as far as you could see, a mile off the Susquehanna River.
Wow.
And we moved to a place with no trees, wide open plains, no real running water to speak of, and weather extremes that, basically all signs of the apocalypse, from pestilence to windstorms to blizzards to, I've seen temps as high as 115 in the summer and as low as 26 below in the winter. So we get it all in Western Kansas. And that creates a lot of opportunities for adopting technology, but also limits the technologies and the management practices that, you have to have a very wide array of tools in your toolbox. And, you know, um, we try to take a realistic, pragmatic approach to adopting those technologies as to what technologies are going to be impactful, ideally short term, but also positively impactful long term. And technologies specific to the region that we feel are really impactful, both short term and long term, would be really centered around water conservation. So if you go in field, for example, when we map our water footprint, the single largest aspect of our water footprint is the water used to irrigate crops and ultimately feed our cows. So for us to make a difference both on the tomorrow's level of the water table and the ability for the fifth generation to have a viable business to come back to, we look at those sort of technologies. So we've deployed um, soil moisture probes across all of our irrigated acres. We're actively exploring ways in which we can take those to the next level, and allow for more artificial intelligence to be adopted, autonomous pivots, kind of allowing the computer to control the irrigation passes on farm, to things like smart cow cooling systems in the freestall barns. And that technology is really progressing to where, as temperatures increase, the frequency of watering cows or sprinkling cows increases, ultimately trying to maximize animal welfare while minimizing water consumption, to things like our on-farm milk processing plant. We process about 1.5 million pounds of raw milk a day every day through that plant. And the of all the water we use in there, about 72% of it is water we reclaim from the milk that we process.
Wow.
So highly water efficient, highly impactful when it comes to reducing the carbon footprint associated with transporting our finished goods to market. But additionally, it expands our market footprint. We can travel a raw milk equivalent farther than what we can travel a true 100 weight of raw milk. So we can reach more distant markets. We can customize that to be a little bit more applicable to what our customer wants. But additionally, we get to keep water over top of the Ogallala aquifer on which we sit. So those are an example of kind of regionally specific technologies that really, really matter to us. And they may not matter to the farm in Ohio at MVP. Their
Right.
water issues are vastly different than the water issues we faced face in Western Kansas. They're more concerned about surface water contamination and avoiding those runoff and those sort of things, whereas in Western Kansas, conservation is the name of the game.
Yeah. Oh, I love hearing all about this, and especially the implementation of technology and figuring out which ones are right for you. And that's one of the undercurrents that I saw when I read about the history of your family farm was there's constantly this kind of reference to being willing and I guess almost bold enough to adopt technology. And I think that's kind of a theme that I've seen throughout as you talk. Y'all have made very bold steps, and even in your storyline, I think it said that, the governor of Pennsylvania stopped by and said y'all were one of the most progressive dairies even in the 80s at that point in time. And today we look at you, and I do believe World Dairy Expo named you Farmer of the Year last year.
Mm.
Yep, and you were also awarded the Leader in Technology Award from the 2025 Milk Business Conference, which are huge accomplishments.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure after so many generations and working so hard at everything you do, there's those daily rewards. But in one of those write-ups, it talks about the validation gap, meaning from the time that you take that risk to invest or take on that technology until you actually see the reward. And so as you start thinking about that risk factor, what goes into your head, or what pieces play a part in whether you decide to adopt that technology or try it out or integrate it versus those that won't work for you? How do you kind of meander through that initial conversation in your head about an emerging technology?
Yeah, and that's a question we talk about all the time internally, right? Because hey, it feels like technology is coming at us faster than we can digest it. Um, but that being said, first things first is there a need that we're trying to address that technology can fill? We don't want to adopt technology just for the sake of adopting technology or trying to be
Right.
cool.
Yep.
It's got to matter. And then if it matters, is it cost effective? Is the juice worth the squeeze? And hey, there are technologies that would be really positively impactful and would help fill a gap on our farms, but we just can't simply afford them. And then beyond that, and you touched on this earlier, it's really about the support. Do we have the internal skill set, support team, or bandwidth to be able to learn how to manage this technology, how to maintain these technologies, that sort of stuff? And if we don't have that skill set, is there a support structure and a support network locally or regionally that can help with that? And hey, sometimes even in light of not having that support structure there, we will make the decision to move forward with it. Case in point is when we built the on-farm processing plant. Obviously, we were dairy farmers. We didn't know how to run a milk processing plant. And we knew that some of the programmers that we were going to be dependent upon lived in Indonesia. And in order for us to, at the time, hey, we were still dealing basically off a dial-up dang near. And that obviously is not conducive to having someone from halfway around the world bugging into our system and attempting to make programming modifications. So we actually worked with some local internet providers to, and it was part of a greater project. It's not like they did this just for us, but it was they accelerated the implementation of a regional project to get fiber basically run within proximity to the processing plant to where we could connect and have 24-hour a day high-speed internet access. So simply because the support network isn't there doesn't necessarily mean that it's a hard no. It just might mean that we have to adopt, we have to sharpen the skill sets of ourselves or our teams internally, or we need to get creative on how we're going to solve that issue. We have some technologies in our milking parlors for automatic post-dip units, robotics that automatically post-dip our cows when they're done being milked. And you don't find a robot technician on the street corners in Colby, America. So, we've had to we've had to basically send our internal maintenance teams off to Wisconsin or off to wherever to get trained up on those skill sets. So, there's a lot of different factors that go into it, but those would be kind of the main criteria that we evaluate before we go or no go.
So let me ask you this as a follow-up. We recently did a survey here that was kind of talking about the barriers to adoption, and one of them is exactly what you referenced there was service personnel and whether we can actually internally kind of troubleshoot, because troubleshooting was the other piece of that. Have you found that, peer producers are important for some of that whether it be knowledge gaps or troubleshooting, or peer producers kind of an important piece of the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. And we love our salesmen, right? We love the companies that are trying to push things to us, and that's all fine and well. But the real where the rubber meets the road is, grabbing the dairy manager, grabbing the parlor manager of farms that have adopted these technologies, and asking them, "Hey, how does this really work in your life? How many hours is it down in a year's time? How much time in a week do you spend tinkering with it? How quickly, how good is this company at supporting you in learning?" It's those sort of things that we rely heavily on industry relations to help you answer those questions. But you touched on something earlier about the dairy industry in Georgia, and about infrastructure. And 27 years ago, when we moved to Kansas, the dairy infrastructure was non-existent. Our nearest dairy service company was over 110 miles away. The nearest dairy veterinarian was, I think, the closest was maybe 60 miles away.
Wow.
What that led to is you became hyper independent. Whether it be cow side practices or figuring out how to work on an air compressor at 3 in the morning, you had to learn those skill sets internally. And we've never really backed off of that push for independence. But we're to the point now, I think, in the dairy industry where a lot of these technologies have eclipsed our ability to house the skill sets internally. So we're heavily dependent, and it's a huge part of how we make these decisions on outside parties and the groups that are actually marketing these technologies.
Yeah, that's awesome information. I think that, a lot of times the learning curve is so staggering. The learning curve is so intimidating on a lot of these things. And some of the learning curve is just shifting in mindset, right? That
Oh, yeah.
I'm now going to be dealing with a lot of data, and how do I process this data, and what's important in this data versus what's not important. And so as you look at maybe talking to some of our producers that are maybe not quite as progressive, maybe they've been more hesitant to make some of the bold moves that you all have made, and that could be that they just don't really know where to start. They don't really know how to sift through. It's very murky to try and figure out, where do I start, or where's the most bang for my buck, return on investment. Do you have any kind of thoughts or suggestions if there is a producer that's kind of struggling with that conversation? Because it is a big investment. Even the smallest technology is a big investment, whether that's time or money, mental capacity, it's an investment.
Oh, yeah.
So I'd just love to hear if you had any just thoughts on where do you start?
Hey, what we try to always start with is we try to always start with what we have. Can we take our herd management software and make it do more for us? Can we take our feed management program and make it do more for us? As opposed to going out and trying to spend money right away, our goal is to always take what we have existing today and see if we can squeeze a little bit more out of it. And that solves a few of the questions that you asked. Normally, like if I've been working with a PC Dart or a Dairy Comp 305 or a Pulse or whatever, I'm familiar with it already. So the learning curve for me to adopt a new way of analyzing that data or whatever is probably less steep. And I'm already paying for it already. So from a financial point of view, and in particular, the dairy industry is hitting a rough time, financially speaking, right now. Milk prices are not great. So, it's about, in my mind, trying to optimize what exists today. But if it is, if we feel like we're getting as much out of the existing tools and programs that we have at our disposal, and we do have a major headache or, an area, let's take feed costs, for example, right? Feed costs are going to be, 65, 70% of a dairy's cost of production. We've deployed technologies on our wheel loaders to where we're measuring at the feed pile before we ever travel to the batch box or the wagon,
Awesome.
with the intention of trying to drive down shrink.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know a 1% decrease in my shrink has pretty substantial impacts on my feed costs on an annual basis. I can run those ROIs pretty quickly. My support staff is probably going to be the local implement dealer. I can start in those ways. But for us, it's really trying to find the biggest headaches we have, or the biggest risks that we see coming to us, and trying to identify what exists today that we can implement to protect against that risk. And hey, the other thing that we always try to tell ourselves is what we're doing right now is working. Like, the ship's not on fire. We don't have to rush into a decision. We have time to ask questions, to get educated, to work through the math, to do all those things. This isn't a critical mass situation. And sometimes, we get pressured by people that, well, this is the right decision. You need to adopt this technology right now. You need to do this. Wait a minute. No, I don't. Like, I need to make a decision that I'm comfortable with before I move. And I guess that would be my advice. Make sure you're comfortable with it.
Yeah, that's awesome, because I actually, I've heard that a lot. Sometimes there's almost this feeling of pressure, like I have to move forward in this way or in this direction, or I'm behind the 8 ball, right? And it's just not enough care or consideration of what that investment is going to mean, short and long term. So I love that last piece. Yeah.
Hey, we scour DHIA records and all that sort of stuff, and there's dairies that have adopted way less technology than we have that kick our butts.
I love the humility.
But it's true though. Like, technology doesn't supplant doing the basics the right way.
Yeah.
And we try to all. I just had this conversation with my nephew, because the 5th generation is working their way back to the business now, and I said, hey, like, you got to remember, like, in our world, we got to milk them, feed them, breed them, calve them, and process milk. Those 5 things, we got to do that right. So
I love how you have that list right on the tip of your tongue. That's an easy one, right?
Yeah, I feel like I need a bumper sticker of that. To kind of pivot here a little bit, but talk about, that pressure, the dairy industry as a whole, at least from the outside consumers or, whoever, kind of get a bad rap for sustainability and sustainability practices sometimes. And I think, most dairy farmers are not ignoring sustainability, but maybe weighing it against economic survival or other hindrances. But in researching you all, I know you all are known for environmental stewardship, whether that is wildlife boxes or, helping native plants populate. I know you all have several verified environmental standards, and you collaborate with eco practices. And my thought process is, if we're looking to get to that level of sustainability, whether that is, dairy producers with their operation, or just people looking inward, wanting to know more about how did you get here? That's kind of my question. How did you get to where you are and think, okay, this is our goal, this is where we want to be sustainability wise? Or was it kind of picking up practices along the way? Oh, this would be a great thing. Well, why don't we add this? To kind of keep you at the forefront of balancing, sustainability and production.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we always try to remind everybody that the number one rule in sustainability is to stay in business. Right. We can't go broke trying to be green, or it's all for nothing, right? And sometimes that message gets, I think, lost. We in production ag get pressured from people outside of production ag to make changes, and to do things differently when at times the risk level for the survivability of your business is just simply too great to take that on. And fundamentally, what is it? 98% of all dairies in the U.S. are family owned. Like you're talking about generations of work, and the pressure to be green in spite of the ability to be profitable just doesn't work.
Right.
But that being said, if you can be profitable, if you are profitable and you want to pursue things that are enhancements to your environmental impact, hey, we can start small. Putting up a bird box doesn't cost a whole lot of money.
Right.
There are conservation programs through NRCS, USDA, conservation districts, in our world, groundwater management districts that can de-risk some of the upfront costs to deploy soil moisture probes or put out cover crops or move to minimum till or no till. I mean, there are ways that practices can be adopted to de-risk the conversion period. And then, to go deeper into that, there are public-private partnerships, right? So there are active companies out there or NGOs that are looking to invest dollars into greening their supply chains, enhancing the sustainability of their local ecosystems. Pheasants Forever, where I live, or local outdoor associations will help you with those things. At the farm in Ohio, Ducks Unlimited will help with some of those programs. There are CPGs pushing into the Ogallala Aquifer area to try and promote and help cost share or co-fund or even directly fund programs to reduce water consumption. So I know that those of us in production agriculture typically don't have a lot of free hours in the day. But that being said, if you have the time and you have the passion to look into those things, there are groups out there that are willing to help de-risk it, that do recognize the inherent risk associated with practice conversion or even mindset shift within a business. There are groups that are willing and able to help, whether it be from a financial or a technical perspective. And I think holding true to the fact that I can't go broke being green
Right.
is key to the conversation, but recognizing that we eat an elephant one bite at a time, and it can start with simple, small, low cost, low risk or no risk activities that can help you on that journey, help start you on that journey.
Yeah, let me pop in here because I want to mention something, because we have talked innovation, right? And we've talked innovation technology, but man, did you just mention innovation that's beyond that, which is being innovative with partnering with other people to help our progress and to help their progress. That's innovative in its own right. So sorry, Sophie, I just had to pop in on that one, but innovation is innovation.
No, you're good. You're good. I love the mindset of not having to do it all at once, but B, thinking about, okay, if I just do these small steps, there are bigger steps that can come, having those goals for yourself, but not letting your farm or your way of life be pressured too much by outside forces, while still, striving for sustainability. I think that's great advice. Sure. So this is kind of a big question, but I'm curious for your perspective. We've talked about technology today and kind of some of the trends that are occurring now, or kind of a path that we might go down as an industry, or your family in the future. And I'm just wondering, kind of along that route, or is there something that you are super excited about, technology-wise, trend-wise, for the future, or something that you all are looking at and being like, oh, maybe we can implement this to help your farm?
Yeah, for sure. We have our eyes on interactively working on a variety of different technologies. And, you know, I kind of view it in at least in what I look at, in really kind of three different areas. One is kind of centered around data and how we analyze data, how we use data. How do we utilize things like artificial intelligence or machine learning? The long term goal that we have with a lot of that, because you know any dairy, any ag operation has the capability of being just a massive data generating hub.
Right.
We can deploy sensors out the wazoo. We can track everything we want to from a cow side perspective. We can generate terabytes of data. But the question becomes, how do you use it? How do you make it impactful? How do you still keep cow side activities simple and efficient and effective for the cow side teams, while getting as much value as possible out of the data that we generate? And recognizing that, hey, and we know this for a fact today, we gather data that today is useless to us, but tomorrow it might have value.
Mm.
But that being said, we're working with some different companies on um, taking existing data points we have, whether it be production data, health data, genomic information, current weather, et cetera, and using that to create kind of a predictive analytic model that allows us to identify the cow that won't get bred before I ever breed her. Or, ideally, we move to the cow that is at high risk of death or high risk of forced culling, and I can make a better decision for her and a better decision for me before before that decision gets forced upon the both of us. But then we look at that as well, and I would say that there's some really cool things coming out in the genomic space as well, on novel traits, on how to dovetail some novel traits into enhanced sustainability.
Yeah.
There's some really neat things that are coming down the pike, and we're certainly not privy to all of it, right? But then additionally, we look at robotics, and how can robotics standardize procedures, make the touch point with the cow the same every time. Human nature, right, is that we are inherently a little bit variable. How I run a scrubber gun at the start of a shift is going to be different than how I run it at the end of the shift.
Right.
And we know that our cows do better and are happier and more content if we can be the same every single day. Um, so robotics and autonomous vehicles, those sort of things, whether it be autonomous feed tractors or autonomous push tractors that are scaled up to work within a farm like what we have, we're super excited about that sort of stuff. And then beyond just the data piece associated with genomics, I go back to some of the novel trait selections that are coming down the pike that I think we know as McCarty Family Farms. I'm not going to go toe to toe with a Genosaurus or an Oakfield Corners or a Ruan and win in a chess match of genetics. They're going to kick my butt all day long. But that doesn't mean that we should give up on trying to enhance our genetics, accelerate the pace of our genetic progress, or create genetics that are of value to the global marketplace. And that's where we view that we as McCarty Family Farms have an opportunity to be impactful, is some of that novel trait selection where we can be an early adopter
Right.
and hopefully bring value to the global dairy industry.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Now, are you hoping that kind of all of this develops in the next 5 to 10 years? I mean, I know it's variable depending on, where technology leads, but would this be your hope for the next 5 to 10 years, or are there kind of some other pieces that you're hoping develop as well?
Yeah, hey, I think some of this stuff is actively in development, right? And I think it's sometimes I feel good saying this, sometimes I feel bad saying this, but it's an interesting time to be alive, right? And I think with there's a ton that we don't know that's going to happen with artificial intelligence. And some of it may be really positive for humanity and some of it may be negative, but there's going to be a lot that happens very, very quickly in my mind. And um, we're just trying to reframe our ways of thinking and build kind of a cadre of trusted advisors to help us sort through the absolute tidal wave of opportunities or technologies or whatever that are going to come at us via artificial intelligence, because it just seems like everybody's got a tool today, and artificial intelligence is getting embedded into everything, whether it be the accounting software we use as QuickBooks, or the herd management programs, or the way we analyze genomic data, or camera programs on your farms. I mean, AI is everywhere, and I think that the pace at which that changes technology and the way farms work and what have you is going to move at a pace that we're probably not prepared for. But yeah, I mean, hey, I really think that the next 5 to 10 years will be an extremely transformative time in the dairy industry, in large part not just because of the technology, but if you look at the pace of consolidation in the U.S. dairy industry, not that I don't necessarily say that's a good thing. I think it's just a thing, and I think it's a thing across all industries. But I think that that's also going to change the landscape of the dairy ownership structure across the country and the dairy management structure across the country, and is going to change the way in which technology gets adopted and deployed across the farms.
That was awesome.
I love it.
Well, I think we're getting towards the end of our conversation here, and I know Sophie is going to close us out with her formal ending, but I have asked to pop in here and just say a sincere thank you. I'll be quite honest, when we reached out, we never guessed that you would return.
It's so true.
Because who are we relative to you, right? And you and your family are so successful, so progressive, so innovative, so bold in the decisions that you're making. And I really think that the whole reason we started this podcast was for conversations like this, to give people access to folks like you, and conversations that could be very impactful for them as well as they continue on some of these journeys and critical decision making that could change what their future is. So again, Sophie will give the formal exit, but I just wanted to pass along a sincere thank you for giving us your time today and your insight and your knowledge, all of it.
No, I appreciate that. And I mean, I'd be remiss to say that, or give the impression that we've done this alone. We certainly have not. We aren't the smartest guys in the room, and there's a lot of people that we rely on that are smarter than us, and a lot of people both internally and externally that have helped us make decisions. And not every decision we've ever made has been a good one. We've really screwed up a lot of times, and that's part of the learning too, right? But we've been very fortunate, and we're thankful for that. And we certainly recognize how lucky we are, not only to be dairymen, but to see some glimpses of success as a dairy farmer, and certainly recognize that it's a team effort.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic take-home message, not only for the dairy industry, but for any business and just life itself, relying on your village, whether that's your family, as you all have generationally, or just those you're working with to make things better. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We did not think you would, but we're so thankful that you've been here. All right.
Thank
well,
you guys.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that was Ken McCarty, co-owner and manager of McCarty Family Farms, sharing his perspective on family legacy, technological innovation, and the future of dairy production. Conversations like these remind us that the strength of the dairy industry lies in its people, and progress is built on generations of commitment, blending tradition with new ideas to move the industry forward. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone who is interested in technology's role in modern dairy farming. Thank you so much for joining us, and tune in next time for more from the Dairy Good Dawgs, because every great glass of milk starts with great people.